Hi, and welcome to Chapter 12. We're going to continue our study of the cardiovascular system, focusing on the heart today. So let's begin. Um, so obviously, blood flows through the heart and blood vessels, but it has to be in an organized manner, right? So we call these circuits through which the blood is going to flow through the heart and the blood vessels. So there are two circuits, and let's take a peek at those. The first one involves its path to and through the lungs, right? Because the lungs have to be included in order to pick up oxygen, okay? Because that's what the blood does. It carries lots of stuff, but its main goal and function is to carry oxygen to all the cells. So it has to go to the lungs to pick up oxygen. And then it goes back to the heart, and the heart again pumps the blood to what we call the systemic circuit, which is through the rest of the body, right? To deliver that oxygen and then bring, waste products back to the heart. All right, let's take a peek at what this looks like. I'm gonna draw a picture. Okay, so chapter 12 is the heart. So if we draw our heart, I'm just going to draw a simple heart like this. And what the heart is, it's just a pump. It's a pumping machine. All right. So blood that is low in oxygen, and now I'm going to use the colors blue to represent low O2 and the red to represent high O2. All right. So blood actually, or hemoglobin, when bound to oxygen, has a bright red color. Okay, so this is a real color thing. And when it loses its oxygen, and there's not much oxygen attached, it has a really dark red, which through the skin looks blue. Okay, so if you look at your skin, if you're old like me, your skin is very thin, and you can see the blue vessels, right? And it's blue because the blood is low in oxygen and has that color. So blood that is low in oxygen comes to the heart, okay, on this side. Now I'm going to call this side of the heart the right side. And that may be confusing because, hey, that's not your right. But remember that the patient is the most important thing. So this is the patient's right side, right? Because they're facing you. So this is the right side of the heart, and this is the left side of the heart. So blood enters through the right side of the heart and then is pumped to the lungs. Okay, I'm going to put the lungs here. And what happens at the lungs? It picks up oxygen and becomes oxygenated, but the pressure is too low to make it all the way through the body and then back to the heart, right? So on its way out to the body, it first comes back to the heart on the left side, and then the left side is going to transport the blood out um, to the body. Oops, I should have done that. To the body, where the cells of the body will take that oxygen and substitute it for carbon dioxide. So then the content of the blood gets depleted of its oxygen. Okay. I didn't. I should have did. So it should have been, and then okay. So the blood high in oxygen then goes to all the cells of the body. The cells use the oxygen, and then the blood has to come back to the heart in order to pick up more oxygen in the lungs. Okay. I should put lungs because it'll go to the right and left side. So this is just showing left side, but know that as the blood leaves here, it's going to go to the right and left side. All right. So this circuit here to the lungs and back to the heart is called the pulmonary circuit. Whereas this side going from the heart to the body and back to the heart is called the systemic. Systemic means, the body. So if there's an infection or something that is systemic, it's throughout the body. Okay? And so understanding this basic flow of blood will be important in your understanding of the heart. Back. Okay, let's describe the position of the heart in anatomical language. Remember, you want to always use your anatomical language. Oh, let me put a picture here. I have a picture from the textbook. Okay, you might want to look at that more closely, which just shows, it's nice because it shows the oxygenated, the red side, and the deoxygenated. And it includes both the lungs, so you can kind of see how that works. All right, let's describe the position. So there's lots of ways we can describe it. Posterior to the sternum is the breastbone, okay? Anterior to the vertebral column, so in front of the vertebrae, within the thoracic cavity, and more specifically within the thoracic cavity, it's within the mediastinum and the pericardial cavity. All right, so we're getting more and more kind of specific. And it's also located medial to the lungs. So these are all proper descriptions of where it's located. And remember, we always want to use anatomical language. All right, so here's just some pictures of where it's located to remind you. All right, next question. Let's take a look at the heart and look at the layers of the heart. Okay, and I'm going to list them here. We'll start with superficial to deep, I think. So we're going from the outside and moving inward. Okay, and these are the different layers. Okay, fibrous pericardium, parietal pericardium, pericardial cavity, visceral pericardium, sometimes called the epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. All right, now before I bring up a picture, I think I'm going to draw it. Okay, so let's draw it. So again, drawing is really important versus just looking at a picture. Something happens when you draw. So let's get another paper. And we're going to draw our layers of the heart and around the heart. Okay, so I want to remind you of some membranes that are around the heart. Remember that there are serous membranes that surround these internal organs. Okay, around the heart, it's the pericardium. Around the lungs, it's the pleura. Around the abdominal pelvic cavity structures, organs, it's the peritoneum. Right? These are serous membranes that surround these particular organs. So we have to include that description. So think about it like if you're doing surgery, you won't be doing surgery, but if they're describing the surgery or conditions or whatever, you have to understand what each of these layers is. But I always say, if you're doing surgery, you need to know what you're going to cut through in order to get to the heart, right? So remember that the heart sits like this, and then we have the serous membrane, the pericardium. Now, the pericardium, that relationship of these serous membranes to the organ is like putting your fist into a balloon. All right, so imagine putting your fist into a balloon. It's going to create a part of that balloon that sits right on the surface of your hand. there's a space there, and then there's going to be the outer part of the balloon. Okay, but it's still all balloon. It's all like one layer, but now you've just changed the orientation. It's the same thing. With the heart, there's part of the pericardium that is going to sit directly on top of the heart. And then there's going to be a part that's going to be around it. Now, this allows for blood vessels, okay, to leave the heart like that. All right, so this is the serous membrane. Remember, there's a parietal pericardium. There's that pericardial cavity. And then there's the visceral pericardium. All right. Now, in addition to this, there is another layer out here of connective tissue. All right. They also call this the fibrous pericardium, and it kind of attaches the heart to other structures and anchors it kind of. So this one is the fibrous pericardium. Now, and so there's sometimes confusion because, hey, isn't the pericardium the serous membrane? Well, yes, but this term peri means around, and cardium, cardiac means heart. So it just literally translates around the heart. And so this is the fibrous part, which is connective tissue, which anchors it to other structures. Okay. And then we have the heart itself here. So when we talk about these layers, we're going to go through each one of these layers. This fibrous pericardium, the parietal pericardium, the pericardial cavity, the visceral pericardium, sometimes called the epicardium. Epi means above or on top of. So sometimes you'll see it called the epicardium, which is just the visceral pericardium. And we haven't even gotten to the heart yet, because then we're going to get to the heart muscle called the myocardium. Myo means muscle, cardiac means heart, right? So myocardium is the heart muscle, the cardiac muscle. And then there's an inner lining called the endocardium. Endo means within. All right, so you see the word cardium, you know you're talking about the heart. So let's go back to our list here. Oops, there we go. All right, now hopefully that makes more sense. Fibrous pericardium. All right, that's connective tissue. Parietal, that's the serous membrane that lines the cavity, and then the pericardial cavity, the visceral pericardium, sometimes called the epicardium. Then we get to the heart muscle itself, the myocardium, and then there's an inner lining of epithelium. It's actually simple squamous epithelium, which is actually continuous within the vessel. So this simple squamous epithelium then kind of travels and lines the inside of blood vessels. So it's all kind of continuous. So let's take a look at some pictures, which also will be helpful. So let's take a look at that heart kind of as it sits. Here we have this fibrous pericardium that anchors it right to blood vessels. And then we have the inner visceral pericardium, which is the serous part. Well, I'm sorry, the parietal pericardium first, and then the visceral pericardium. And in between is the cavity filled with the serous fluid, right? And we have these serous membranes. Why? Because the heart moves like this, right? As it beats. And so we have a visceral layer and a parietal layer, and in between in that right, pericardial cavity, there's a serous fluid, which is a lubricant, and it allows it to move like this and not create friction and heat, right? So all these organs in our lungs that are moving, in our abdominal pelvic cavity that's squeezing and pushing things along, these all move, and this relationship of the serous membranes work really well. And then we have this nice picture here, which just has the layers. Okay. So we can see, each layer here as we get to the inside of the heart. So this is all myocardium, which is the cardiac muscle. It's the heart itself, right? Um, okay, that makes sense. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the path of blood through the heart. So I'm going to go back and draw the heart again. And again, I just think it's really important to be able to do this. Okay. When you really understand the heart, well, when you draw it, and if you do it correctly, then you really understand the heart. Because to just look at a picture is just oftentimes I ask students, I think I've mentioned this, that they say, "Oh, I know it." And then I ask them to draw it and they are unable to draw it. That means they don't really know it. So notice how when we look at diagrams of the heart and pictures in the body, it's tilted. Okay. The heart naturally has a tilt, kind of tilted to the left of the body. I don't draw it that way. I draw it straight up and down, but know that in the body, it's actually tilted a little bit. So let's go ahead and draw. I'm gonna draw some blood vessels first. That kind of helps me to get positioned. All right. So kind of hold off on drawing and wait till I am gonna do this. Okay. I'm gonna draw my heart in here. Okay, I gave it a little bit of a tilt anyway. Okay. All right, now I'm going to put my chambers in. So I'm going to put some valves in here that will allow blood to flow in a single direction. Okay, so there are some things I want you to know that you'll be required to know. Number one is the path of blood through the heart, but all the structures, the chambers, the vessels, the valves that it will pass through as it goes through the heart. All right. Um, let's start with the four chambers. There are four chambers to the heart. Remember that this is the right side of the heart and this is the left side of the heart as it sits in the patient. You're looking at the patient. So we call this the right, and I'm just going to abbreviate by R, atrium. This is the left atrium. Now, an atrium in a building is that first room you walk into. Okay. So the atria of the heart are the chambers where blood enters the heart. Okay. So remember that, right? The atrium, you walk into an atrium. Then down here, these two chambers are the ventricles. And I'm going to put my list down here because I'm going to draw some things here. So leave this a little clear. So this is the right ventricle. And this is the left ventricle. Okay, ventricle is a space. We see ventricles in the brain, we see ventricles in different places. It's just a space. All right, so those are the four chambers. So you do need to know four chambers. And now the valves, four valves. Valves are important to keep blood flowing in one direction. We don't want blood to go backwards. Okay. There are four, and maybe I'll list them here. One, two, three, four. Okay. So the first one is called the right AV valve or atrioventricular valve. Atrio. I hope that makes perfect sense. You don't want to memorize that. Okay. It's too long of a word, but just know that it's between the atria and the ventricles. So this must also be a atrioventricular valve or AV valve, and you'd be correct. All right. There's another name for this, the tricuspid valve. Okay, so tricuspid is often used. And what does it mean? It means it has three cusps on that valve. So it's kind of flappy. There's flaps to them. So there's three flaps on that. And we'll talk about why there's flaps on it. Number two, okay. Number two would be the left AV valve, atrioventricular valve, or the bicuspid, okay, which means it has two cusps on it, flaps on it, or there's a third term called the mitral valve. Mitral comes from a mitre, which is a hat, a religious hat, a bishop's hat. Someone thought it looked like a mitre, so they called it the mitral valve. This term you will often see in medicine. So mitral valve prolapse, okay? So that means the flaps of the mitral valve flip backwards and it prolapse. But you should again be familiar with all the terms because you don't know how you're going to see it. And so to understand, one way I remember is you try what's right and you buy what's left. So tricuspid, bicuspid. Try what's right and you buy what's left. Okay. The third one is called the pulmonary valve, sometimes called the pulmonary semilunar valve. Semilunar means half moon. These are a different kind of valve. They don't have flaps. They have these little pouches that as blood comes out and as it starts to backflow, these pouches get filled with blood and they look like little half moons. Semilunar means half moon. All right, so they look like little half moons. And then the fourth one is also a semilunar valve, but it's the aortic. Semilunar valve. Okay. And so both of these have these pouches that get filled with blood. All right, so those are the four valves. The last one are the vessels. Okay, the vessels attached to the heart. Okay, there's lots of vessels that we'll learn some of them in the next chapter, but here I want you to know some of the main vessels attached to the heart. So I'm going to go ahead and label those. We're going to start on the right side of the heart, and blood enters through these two vessels. Now I drew them as blue, and so I'm going to distinguish between arteries and veins. Arteries, an artery will take blood away from the heart. Whereas veins will take blood to the heart. Okay, so that's the main difference. To and away from the heart. Now, most arteries are oxygenated. Most veins are deoxygenated or low in oxygen. Okay, but there are exceptions. So we have to use this definition of an artery and a vein because of those exceptions. So this is taking blood to the heart. So the blood is coming to the heart. And these are, in fact, veins. They are low in oxygen. This is called a superior, because it's on the top, vena cava. Vena means vein. All right, so if there's a superior vena cava, what must this one be that's below it? This is the inferior vena cava. Okay, both veins bringing blood into the right atrium. Blood flows into the right atrium through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, out the pulmonary semilunar valve into this vessel. This is called the pulmonary trunk. Now, is it a vein or an artery? It's low in oxygen, but where is blood flowing? Away from the heart. So it has to be an artery, even though it's low in oxygen. The pulmonary vessels are the one of the exceptions, okay, where it's deoxygenated or low in oxygen, and it's an artery. So this is the pulmonary trunk is an artery taking blood away from the heart. Then it's going to pass into the pulmonary arteries. So these are the pulmonary arteries. So we have to be careful. We can't just say pulmonary artery because these are the pulmonary arteries. This is called the pulmonary trunk, like a trunk of a tree that branches. This is a trunk. Right? From here, blood is going to where? It's got to go to the lungs. It goes to the left lung over here and the right lung over here, right? And we oxygenate it. And comes back to the heart, oxygenated. So these vessels, these are the pulmonary veins. Yes, they are oxygenated, but they are taking blood to the heart, so they are veins. Okay, don't get confused about that. It's to the heart, so it's a vein, even though it's oxygenated. Comes into the left atrium through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle. Then it's oxygenated, leaves the aortic semilunar, right? Because we're going to travel into the vessel, the big aorta. Now, there's different parts of the aorta because it is so long. There's the ascending aorta, the aortic arch, and then it actually descends down through the body. And the aorta will go all the way down through the abdomen. Okay, and at the abdomen, then it will split to go to the lower extremities. All right. So this is part of the aorta also. Is that clear? The path of blood. All right, let's go back to our sheet here. And I'm gonna, give you a really nice diagram of the heart. Oh, actually, let me give you the kind of the path of, well, actually, let me give you a nice diagram. Oops, dang. Okay, a nice diagram of the heart that you might wanna. Okay, to use to study, if you don't want to draw it or whatever, you don't have to draw it. And then I do want to. Okay, I want to give you another picture that has the, yeah. Hmm. Okay, so this is nice. This has the same picture showing you the path of blood, and then it writes out in kind of what is that a list or a flow chart of structures and the structures through which they pass. Now there's some extra stuff here, coronary vessels, which we'll talk about next. Let me make this a little bit there. Okay. Oh, this messed it up. All right, so this next question. What vessels supply blood to the myocardium? So you might think that, well, blood is flowing through the heart. Shouldn't that supply the myocardium, which is the cardiac muscle itself? Uh, oxygen and things like that, nutrients? The answer is no. It has its own. Oops, I skipped something. Oops. Okay, sorry. I skipped number 37. Let me get rid of that. So I'm going to add to my drawing. Sorry. So there are some structures called the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles. Remember I said to leave some space in your picture. Let's go back to that. Okay, so number 37, we're going to go back to our picture of our heart. And I already forgot because I drew some stuff there. But there's two structures called the chordae tendineae, and you should look at the word cords. They're like cords that are like tendons. Okay, so they're attached to something. They're attached to a muscle, right? A tendon it attaches a muscle to a bone. Well, these are cords that are kind of like tendons in that they're going to attach to a muscle called the papillary muscles. So within the wall of the myocardium, we have muscular parts that extend out from the cardiac muscle, right? And they extend and like little papillae. A papilla means nipple in Latin or Greek. So like little nipple-like structures that come out of the cardiac muscle. And these are called papillary muscles. Okay, and so there's a bunch of them sticking out from inside. Attached to the papillary muscles are these little cords, tendon-like cords that attach to the cusps of the AV valves. Okay, looks like a little parachute kind of. All right, so these are chordae tendineae, tendinous cords. Okay, it's EAE. And so they attach the cusps of the tricuspid and bicuspids to the papillary muscles. So how does it prevent backflow? What happens is as the ventricles contract, okay, it's going to squeeze blood out the pulmonary trunk and into the aorta and pulmonary trunk through these semilunar valves, right? But what prevents blood from going back through the bi and tricuspid valves? It's this. So as the ventricles are squeezing, the papillary muscles are contracting also, pulling on the little chordae tendineae and holding the flaps so they don't flap backwards, so they don't prolapse. Okay, and it holds them steady like this. And so it keeps the blood from going back through that valve and forces the blood out the semilunar valves. Okay, and that's how those work. Crazy. And how many times does it do this? I think every time your heart beats, it's got to prevent blood from going back. So what happens when that happens? If you have a faulty valve, an AV valve, right? You get backflow and you can hear it. That is called a murmur, a heart murmur. So you can hear the backflow of blood, like a whooshing of blood, and that would be valves that don't close completely. And for most people, it doesn't cause a problem. So what if it backflows a little bit? But if there's a lot of backflow, right, it's not efficient. And so that needs to be taken care of. All right, there we go. So we answered that one. See the diagram, and it prevents the backflow. Next one, which vessels supply blood to the myocardium? These are the coronary vessels. Let me get this up. Okay. Coronary arteries supply blood to the heart, and I'm going to draw a picture. And then this is what it looks like. So these are the coronary arteries. And then these are the coronary veins that take blood. Because remember that it's all continuous. And maybe I should point that out, even though we haven't gotten to the vessels yet. But let me point that out. All right. So how blood flows is blood that's oxygenated will move through arteries and then into smaller arteries called arterioles, little arteries, and then make its way into capillaries. So these are capillaries. And this is where the area that needs oxygen and nutrients and things like this. Capillaries are very thin walled, so substances can easily pass across. So these are the capillaries. And sometimes we call them capillary beds. Okay, and what happens in the capillaries? That's where we get gas exchange. And then from there, blood goes through venules, small veins, to bigger veins, and then back to the heart. Okay, and through the vena cava, the inferior superior vena cavas, and back to the heart, and but even though the picture shows the vessel ending and then the vein starting, it's all continuous. It doesn't stop. All right. And it's continuous in these very, very small capillaries that we can't see. All right. So now when we go back, while we're here, let's go ahead and draw. So we have our heart again. And then here's our aorta coming out. Okay. So again, the blood going through the heart doesn't supply the heart muscle, the myocardium, with blood and nutrients. It needs its own supply. So we have vessels that come directly off the aorta and branch throughout the heart. These are the coronary arteries. I'm going to do AA for arteries, plural. Okay. So this is called the left coronary artery. Sorry, I'm just going to make coronary artery. And this one is the right coronary artery. Oh, coronary artery. Now, the left coronary artery branches into the it has different names. The anterior descending coronary artery, or the interventricular coronary artery and interventricular. And this one's called the circumflex. These are all coronary arteries, and they are taking blood to every cell of the heart. And then there's veins that bring blood back, all right, and empties actually in the back of the heart through a big vein, which dumps it back into the right atrium here. So this is going in the back of the heart. And then this is in the front. Okay, so blood is going to take it back into the right atrium also through its own supply. But let's talk about the coronary arteries. The coronary arteries, here, the question is, what if there's a blockage? Okay, what's going to happen? that area of the heart that's supplied by that coronary vessel begins to die. We call it a myocardial infarction. Myocardial means the heart muscle. Infarct is low oxygen or death of tissue due to low oxygen. Okay. So essentially it dies. So this is a heart attack. So what can you do? You have to resupply blood to that area. You either clear the clot or what the blockage. So if it's a clot, you can dissolve the clot. You can open that vessel. If it's not a clot, and let's say it's a plaque buildup from atherosclerosis, you can clear that off. If you can't clear it, sometimes they'll do a bypass surgery where they take vessels and they bypass the blocked area like that. So a triple bypass would be, three vessels. They usually take a vein from like your leg and then bypass it, the blocked area. Okay, so that's what would happen. Let's take a look back. And all right, so coronary vessels, you can get a myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack. Oh, I didn't put that. Okay. All right. Next thing is what we call the cardiac conduction system. So how do you regulate the beating of the heart? Okay, now, this is talking about blood supply, but how does it know when to beat? When to contract? Because it's very rhythmic, right? And it's very organized. You have to contract the atria first to squeeze blood into the ventricles, and then the ventricles contract after the atria. If they all contracted, on their own, willy-nilly, then you won't be able to push blood out of the heart. So there has to be a way to regulate that. So I'm going to put here the path of the electrical conduction system. So it's the electricity, the electrical part of the heart that tells the myocardium to contract. All right. So there has to be an electrical part that will tell the myocardium to contract. So let's go ahead. I'm going to draw that and then put a picture. Okay. So go back here. And drawing lots today. Let's draw our heart again. You're going to get real good at drawing that heart. But I hope you see the value of drawing, right? Okay. And then we have our, I'm going to make it a little wider, our septums. One thing I didn't draw in the picture of the heart is the septum. A septum is a wall. We have a nasal septum between the right and left nasal cavities. And then in the heart, we have a septum here between the atria and a septum between the ventricles. So this wall between the atria is called the interatrial septum. Remember, inter means between. This would be the interventricular, between the ventricles, septum. Okay, so now we have our walls here. This is the right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. The electrical conduction system begins in the right atrium. And when I say electrical conduction system, it's, think of the we talked about it in the nervous system, right? How electrical impulses travel along neurons. Well, muscles are similar. they conduct electrical impulses that tell them to contract. And the heart muscle is no different. It's going to be able to conduct electrical impulses along pathways, specialized cardiac muscle cells that conduct the electrical impulse along it. All right, so don't worry too much about the details, but know that it's the electrical part that's going to tell the heart to contract in its very rhythmic fashion. All right, and we're talking about ions, right? Ions moving in and out of the membranes, and that's what's moving along. So don't think too much about it, other than here, okay, and this pathway. So this is called the SA node, sinoatrial node, sinoatrial. All right, the SA node is what we call the pacemaker of the heart. Its cardiac cells here have a little faster rate of contraction or conduction, right? So normally, let's say a heart muscle, cardiac muscle cell will contract at this rate. But another cardiac muscle cell might have a faster rate of contraction. But when we put these together, I can't do them at the same time, slow and fast. If we put them together, they contract together at the same time. They're electrically connected. They have those gap junctions and other things. But anyway, they contract together. So the sinoatrial node sets the pace for the beating of the heart. It has the fastest rate of conduction, and it will set the pace for that beat. So that's the beginning of that conduction system. So I'm going to write up here, this is the electrical conduction system. Okay, so from here, the electrical impulse is going to actually travel across all the atria and cause the atria to contract. So the atria contract together. Now, what's to prevent the electrical impulse from going to the ventricles and having the ventricles contract at the same time? Well, they are separated electrically because of these pathways. So there's an area here also in the right atrium called the AV node. The atrioventricular. You already know that term because it's between the atria and the ventricles, right? So all the electrical impulses will travel here where there'll be a pause. So there's a pause here that allows the ventricles to get filled with blood before the ventricles contract. We have to have that pause, otherwise the atrium ventricles will contract together and we can't squeeze blood through the heart, right? From here, the electricity actually goes into the interventricular septum by way of a pathway called the AV bundle, also called the bundle of His. His is a name of a person. So I tend to not use these terms, but the AV bundle tells me more about it. The bundle of His doesn't tell me where it's located, but AV tells me it's in the heart between the atria and the ventricles, right? Because this is going from the atria into the ventricles. Then from here, it's going to split into two pathways, a right and a left side. These are called bundle branches because the bundle is going to branch. Okay, and there will be a right and a left bundle branch. Okay, and all these bundle branches are going to do is they're going to take the electrical impulse and spread it across the right ventricle and the left ventricle, but it's going to branch into these small branches. These are called Purkinje fibers. Purkinje is a person. And there's not another name for this, um, not that I've seen. Okay, so these are the Purkinje fibers as it branches and spreads across the ventricles. And then the ventricles will contract. All right, now we can measure this spread of electricity across the heart in what we know as the EKG or the ECG. The cardiogram. Okay, electrocardiogram is a measurement. Okay, we hook someone up, we put different leads around the heart. It's a measurement of the electrical activity across the heart. So that's what you're doing. Some of you may have had an EKG. You certainly will be, looking at information about EKGs. So again, an understanding is important of what you're actually looking at. So what would it look like in a reading? Does that look familiar? Okay. Blip. What does that mean? People see it all the time and they know it has something to do with the heart, right? You put the leads around the heart and you get these blips. This repeats over and over and over again. Each one of these sets represents a cardiac cycle, okay? A full heartbeat, contraction of the atria, contraction of the ventricles. But this doesn't measure the contraction. It measures the electrical part that precedes the contraction because it's the electrical part that has to tell the heart to contract. All right, in its rhythm. Interestingly, the cardiac cells are what we call myogenic. They kind of can beat on their own if you take them away from the nervous system. They have their own electrical generation within itself, which is kind of unique. All right. Anyway, let's label it. This little blip is called the P wave. These blips are called the QRS complex, and this is called the T wave. Now, what do these represent? Let's start with the P wave. So we just look at our electrical conduction system. What happens first? Oh, it's the atria. The atria, the electrical part goes to the atria first. So that's what has to happen first. The P wave is depolarization. And I use the term depolarization, not contraction. Remember, we're not talking about contraction. We're talking about electrical part. So that's depolarization, where in the neuron, it was the sodium ion channels open and sodium comes rushing in. That's what's picked up. So this is depolarization of the atria. And then after that happens, then the atria contract. But we don't record it here because it's only electrical. So the atria will contract in here. The QRS, and we call that the complex because it's more than one blip, is depolarization of the ventricles, right? Because that's going to happen next. And it happens after it. So this is time as you move across here. So atria depolarize first, then contract, then ventricles will depolarize and contract. And then it allows the blood to squeeze from the atria, then into the ventricles, and then the ventricles squeeze. So it's very efficient. The last thing is the T wave, which is a recovery, which is repolarization, right? Because it has to repolarize of the ventricles. Now, do the atria repolarize too? Yes. Yes, they do, but it's kind of lost in the QRS. So there is a little blip for the atria, but it's kind of lost in there. All right. So that now you know what each of these little blips mean. This is the atria, this is the ventricles. So what would a arrhythmia look like? What would a abnormal EKG look like? So let's take a look at maybe some possibilities. Um, and that actually is the next question. And so we'll just kind of finish it here by looking at some of these abnormalities. So this is not actually a question on your study guide, but let's take a look at some that I've seen like in class. You know, we hook up the students to the EKG machines, and then I've seen lots of students EKGs. Most of them are normal, but occasionally I get something abnormal. One semester I had a gal whose EKG on the P wave had like a double peak. Okay. What does that mean? That means that the atria are not depolarizing together, right? That they're depolarizing at very different times. Okay. As you move across it, this side depolarizes and then that side depolarizes. Okay. And so, you know, it wasn't really a big deal. Anything to deal with the atria aren't, you know, isn't as concerning because the blood will get down into the ventricles eventually. All right. It's the ventricles that are super important. In that same class, I had a guy whose EKG looked like this. All right, now this deals with the ventricles, so this is a little more concerning. All right, there was a double peak. So what does that mean? That means that here, as the pathways, the bundle branches moving down into the ventricles, that one side was slower than the other. They didn't move at the same time. And so there was a blockage there was a blockage in one side of his bundle branches. And that's more concerning, okay, when the ventricles aren't being depolarized at the same time. So he did go and get that checked. One semester, I had a young guy whose wow, his QRS peak was so large. Now, this QRS is an indication of kind of the size of the heart. So the P wave is much smaller because the atria are smaller than the ventricles. This tells me that his heart was very large. Okay, and I asked him to go get it checked out, and I didn't follow up, so I'm a little worried about that. But he did say his family had like a history of larger hearts. So this is very concerning. All right, what's happening when an EKG looks like that? All right, what is this? There is no P wave. You get little things like this. Okay, this is called atrial fibrillation or AFib. You've probably heard of that. All right, a lot of people have AFib. I have two brother-in-laws who have AFib. All right. So what does that mean? Fibrillation is an uncoordinated contract or electrical uh, uh, um, uncoordinated electrical activity, right? Which means that the SA node is not really controlling the uh, the the electrical activity in the atria. So that the atrial cells are independent of each other. They're not coordinated. But it's not as serious because the ventricles are coordinated and you get the QRS. Okay, so the blood isn't maybe getting into the ventricles as efficiently, but it is. And then the ventricles contract and you're okay. So AFib, what would ventricular fibrillation look like? Fibrillation. All right. Now that's serious. Okay. So it would look like that. Okay. So VFib, that's where all the cells are not coordinated and the heart is just kind of jiggling and it can't coordinate to squeeze together to push blood out. This is, so what do you do here? Okay, it's time to get out the paddles and you defibrillate. And what they're doing is they're applying a very strong electrical current to shock the heart to get the SA node back in control. Okay, so if they give a huge volt of electricity all at once, boom, hopefully the SA node will take over and again create, the normal sinus, no, I do all abnormal, sinus rhythm, they call it. Okay, so fibrillation is bad and you defibrillate to take care of that. Okay, let's go back. So let's draw let me give you your electrical conduction system. So this is what it looks like. All right, the SA node, the AV node, the AV bundle, and then the bundle branches and Purkinje fibers. Okay. Let's take a look at this. Okay, and I drew the PQRST. What they mean here, arrhythmia is irregular heartbeat, fibrillation, where the SA node is not in control. Ventricular fibrillation is serious, right? Because the ventricles have to pump blood to the whole body. And so if it's just jiggling, it's not pumping blood. So you defibrillate to get the SA node back in control, that pacemaker. Okay, I hope that was fun. The cardiovascular system is so interesting. And unfortunately, most of us will probably have problems or die from cardiovascular disease. So understanding these terms, these conditions, these basic things about your cardiovascular system will be able to help a lot. All right, and especially in your profession. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next time.